The whiteout was absolute. Isabella screamed as her tires lost grip, the world spinning into a terrifying kaleidoscope of shattered glass and snow. Then silence, a cold, biting silence that settled deep in her bones. She couldn't feel her legs, the heater sputtered and died. Just as the frost began to claim her vision, a shadow eclipsed the moon. A horse's snort cut through the wind. A man, massive and covered in snow, peered through the wreckage. "Hang on," a deep voice rumbled, cutting through her fear. "I've got you!" The digital clock on the dashboard of the luxury SUV blinked 4 p.m. But outside the insulated glass, the sky over Wyoming was already surrendering to a bruised and heavy purple. Isabella tightened her grip on the leather steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. She shouldn't have taken the shortcut. She knew it the moment the paved road turned to gravel, and the gravel disappeared under a fresh layer of powder. But the contract in Seattle had to be signed by the 26th, and the main highway was backed up for 50 miles due to a jackknifed tractor. Isabella was a woman who solved problems. She was the vice president of operations for a logistics firm in Chicago. She moved mountains for a living. Surely she could navigate one actual mountain range. But the Teton Range was not a board of directors, and the storm gathering above the peaks didn't care about her quarterly projections. The snow began as gentle flakes, picturesque and soft, the kind you see inside a snow globe. Within 20 minutes, however, the wind had picked up, transforming the gentle flakes into horizontal needles of ice that lashed against the windshield. The wipers slapped back and forth frantically, fighting a losing battle against the accumulating white wall. Isabella reached for a phone, her heart rate spiking. No service. The words mocked her from the screen. She tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, right on top of the silk scarf she'd bought in Paris last year. The car gave a sudden lurch. The back wheels spun, whining high and desperate against black ice. Isabella gasped, correcting the wheel. But the heavy SUV drifted sideways, floating in a surreal slow-motion slide. She slammed the brakes, the worst thing she could have done. The car became a sled. The world outside tilted violently. There was a sickening crunch of metal on rock, the sound of glass shattering like a dropped chandelier, and then a heavy thud as the vehicle nosedived into a deep drainage ditch. The airbag didn't deploy. The silence that followed was louder than the wind. Isabella sat frozen, her breath coming in short, sharp clouds of vapor. She tried to open the door, but it was jammed against a snowbank. She was trapped. 5 miles away, Colton adjusted the brim of his Stetson, pulling it lower against the biting gale. He sat atop Gunner, his roan quarter horse, watching the fence line. A section of barbed wire had snapped under the weight of an old pine branch, and if he didn't fix it now, the herd would be halfway to Idaho by morning. Colton was a man built of the same stuff as the mountain, hard, silent, and enduring. He wore a heavy canvas coat lined with sheepskin, battered leather chaps, and gloves that had seen more work in a year than most men saw in a lifetime. He finished twisting the wire, testing it with a gloved hand. Solid. He swung back into the saddle, patting Gunner's neck. "Let's get home. Boy soup's on." Gunner didn't move. The horse's ears swiveled forward, twitching. He let out a low, vibrating snort and stomped a hoof into the snow. "What is it?" Colton asked, his voice rough from disuse. He followed the horse's gaze. Through the howling wind, barely audible over the groaning of the trees, there was a sound. It wasn't the cry of a coyote or the scream of an elk. It was mechanical, the high-pitched whine of an engine revving, then dying. Colton narrowed his eyes. No one lived up here. The old logging road had been closed since October. He spurred, Gunner forward. Most men would have turned back toward the warmth of the cabin, but Colton had a code. You didn't leave anything out in this weather, not a calf, and certainly not a person. Isabella was shivering uncontrollably. The cold wasn't just in the air. It was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest. She had wrapped herself in the silk scarf, a laughable defense against sub-zero temperatures. She had tried the engine 3 times. Dead. She had tried to kick the window out. Impossible. The snow was piling up against the glass, burying her alive. Tears froze on her cheeks. She thought about her apartment in Chicago, the thermostat set to a perfect 72 degrees. She thought about the unread emails in her inbox. How meaningless they seemed now. She closed her eyes, feeling a strange drowsiness wash over her. It was seductive, that sleep. It promised an end to the shivering. Something hit the roof of the car. Isabella's eyes snapped open. A shadow blocked out the swirling white of the storm. A face appeared at the shattered side window, or what was left of it. She screamed, but it came out as a weak croak. The man outside didn't flinch. He used the butt of a heavy glove to clear the rest of the glass away. A rush of freezing air invaded the car, but with it came a deep, authoritative voice. "Can you move?" Isabella stared at him. He looked like a giant, framed by the storm, his eyes dark and intense beneath the rim of a cowboy hat. I think so," she stammered, her teeth chattering so hard it hurt. Doors jammed. "You have to come through the window. Now." He didn't ask. He commanded. It reacted, in his arms strong enough to lift the engine block. He grabbed her by the waist of her cashmere coat and hauled her out of the wreckage as if she weighed nothing. The wind hit her instantly, knocking the breath from her lungs. But before she could fall, he pulled her against him. He smelled of wood smoke, wet wool, and horse. It was the most grounding scent she had ever known. "Car's dead!" he shouted over the wind. "My cabin is 2 miles up the ridge. Can you ride?" "Ride," she repeated, hysterical laughter bubbling up in her throat. "I've never been on a horse in my life." Colton didn't argue. He walked her over to the massive beast standing stoically in the snow. He lifted her up, swinging her leg over the saddle, then mounted behind her. He wrapped his heavy coat around her, enclosing her in a cocoon of warmth. His arms came around her to grab the reins. "Hold on to the horn," he said, his chest vibrating against her back. "Gunner knows the way. Don't let go." The ride was a blur of exhaustion and fear. Isabella drifted in and out of consciousness, anchored only by the steady rhythm of the horse and the heat radiating from the man behind her. When she opened her eyes again, the wind had stopped screaming. They were in a clearing. A small log cabin sat nestled against a granite cliff face, smoke billowing invitingly from a stone chimney. Yellow light spilled from the windows, staining the blue snow with gold. Colton dismounted first, then reached up and eased her down. Her legs gave way instantly. "Cowhet," scooping her into his arms. He kicked the heavy wooden door open. The heat hit them like a physical wall-dry, intense, and smelling of cedar. He carried her to a worn leather armchair in front of a cast-iron wood stove and set her down gently. "Stay," he said. Isabella watched as he moved around the cabin. He was efficient, stripping off his wet outer layers, adding a log to the fire, filling a kettle with water. The cabin was rustic but clean. Exposed beams, shelves lined with books, a rifle over the mantel, and a woven rug on the floor. It was silent save for the crackle of the wood and the ticking of an old clock. "Drink this," Colton said, pressing a tin mug into her hands. It was broth, salty and hot. Isabella sipped it, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. She looked up at him properly for the first time. He was handsome in a rough, unpolished way. Dark hair that needed a cut, a shadow of stubble on a square jaw, and eyes that were the color of the pine forest, outside green and brown and deep. "I'm Isabella," she whispered. Colton he replied, taking a seat on the hearth opposite her. "You're lucky, Isabella. Another hour, and the snow would have buried that car." "I have, too. I have to call a tow truck," she said, her city instincts kicking in despite the trauma. "I have a meeting." Colton let out a short, dry laugh. He stood up and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain. "Look out there." She looked. It was a wall of white. "The pass is closed," he said. His voice void of sympathy, but full of reality. "Power lines are down in town. Even if you had a signal, nobody is coming up here. Not for 3 days. Maybe 4. Isabella felt panic rising again. 4 days. I can't stay here for 4 days. My life is down there." Colton looked at her, his gaze steady. "Your life is right here. Right now. Because down there, you'd be dead." He turned back to the stove. "Rest. I'll take the couch. You tit the bed in the loft." The first 2 days were a battle of wills. Isabella paced the small cabin like a caged tiger. She checked her phone every 10 minutes. Despite the 0 bars, she complained about the lack of Wi-Fi. She asked Colton 100 questions about when the plow was coming. Colton answered, with grunts or single words. He went out to tend the horses, chopped wood, and cooked simple meal stews, eggs, biscuits. By the 3rd day, the storm broke. The sun came out, blindingly bright off the fresh snow. Isabella woke up to the smell of coffee. She climbed down the ladder from the loft. Colton was sitting at the small wooden table, repairing a leather bridle. He didn't look up. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied. She poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove. It was strong black, and better than anything she bought at the high-end cafes in Chicago. She sat opposite him. "Can I help?" Colton paused, looking at her manicured hands. "You ever oiled leather before?" "No, but I manage a team of 400 people. I think I can figure it out." A hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He pushed a tin of oil and a rag toward her. "Don't use too much. Rub it in circles." They worked in silence for an hour. It was the first time in 10 years Isabella hadn't been multitasking. No emails, no calls, no news. Just the smell of leather and the repetitive motion of her hands. "Why do you live out here?" she asked suddenly. "All alone." Colton stopped working. He looked out the window at the mountains. "It's honest," he said. "The city, there's too much noise. People say things they don't mean. They want things they don't need. Out here, if you don't chop wood, you freeze. If you don't fix the fence, you lose the herd. It's simple." Isabella looked at him. She saw the lines around his eyes, the strength in his hands. She realized she hadn't thought about the logistics contract in 24 hours. "I think I'm afraid of the quiet," she admitted softly. "If I stop moving, I'm afraid I'll realize I'm not going anywhere." Colton met her gaze. The intensity in his eyes made her breath hit. "Sometimes," he said, his voice dropping an octave, "you have to stop moving to find out where you actually are." That night, the sky was clear. Colton told her to put on her coat. They walked out to the porch. Isabella gasped. The sky wasn't black. It was a canvas of diamonds. The Milky Way was a bright, cloudy river stretching across the heavens. "I've never seen so many," she whispered. "They're always there," Colton said, standing close enough that she could feel his body heat. "You just can't see them through the city lights." He turned to her. The moonlight caught the curve of her cheek. The air between them crackled, hotter than the wood stove inside. He reached out, his rough thumb brushing a stray hair from her face. Isabella leaned into his touch involuntarily. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted him to kiss her. She wanted him to pull her into that coat and never let her go. Colton's hand lingered on her jaw. He leaned in, his eyes searching hers. But then he pulled back. He dropped his hand. "The plow came through the lower pass this afternoon," he said, his voice tight. "I can drive you into town tomorrow morning." The rejection, or was it restraint, stung. "Oh," she said, stepping back. "Right? Back to reality." "Yeah," Colton said, turning back to the door. Back to reality. The drive to the small airstrip in Jackson Hole was excruciatingly quiet. Colton's old truck rumbled over the plowed roads. Isabella sat, with her hands folded in her lap, watching the trees blur by. When they arrived at the small terminal, Colton unloaded her bag. He stood by the truck, his hat pulled low. "Thank you," Isabella said, feeling an ache in her chest that had nothing to do with a car accident. "For saving my life." "Just doing what needed doing," Colton said. He didn't offer to shake her hand. He kept his hands in his pockets, as if afraid that if he touched her again, he wouldn't let her leave. "Colton," she started, not knowing what she wanted to say. "Go on, Isabella," he interrupted gently. "Go close your deal. Go run your world." She nodded, biting her lip to keep the tears back. She turned and walked into the terminal. She didn't look back. If she had, she would have seen Colton watching her until the automatic doors slid shut, looking like a man who had just lost the only thing that mattered. Chicago was gray. Not the beautiful, crisp white of Wyoming, but a dirty, slushy gray. The noise was deafening. Sirens, horns, the constant hum of the HVC system in her glass-walled office. Isabella sat at her mahogany desk. The Seattle contract was signed. She had received a bonus. Her team was celebrating in the break room. She stared at the spreadsheet on her monitor. Rows and columns. Profit and loss. It meant nothing. She closed her eyes and saw the fire in the cabin. She smelled the pine. She felt the rough calluses of Colton's hand on her face. "It's honest," he had said. She looked around her office. This wasn't honest. This was a cage made of money. Isabella stood up. She walked to the window, looking out over the skyline. She remembered the stars. They're always there. You just can't see them. She walked out of her office. She went to the vice president's desk. "Isabella," he asked, "everything okay?" "No," she said. "I'm resigning. Effective immediately." "What? You're crazy." "You're on track for CEO." "I know," she smiled. And for the first time in years, the smile reached her eyes. "But I'm taking a different road." 2 days later, Colton was in the barn, pitching hay. He was working harder than usual, trying to exhaust himself so he could sleep. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. He saw her trying to oil the leather. He saw her looking up at the stars. He heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside. He froze. He told himself it was just a delivery. Feed, maybe, or the vet. He walked out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. A rental car was parked in front of the cabin, and standing there, wearing jeans and heavy boots instead of heels, was Isabella. Colton stopped dead. His heart slammed against his ribs like a wild horse. She walked toward him, stopping a few feet away. The wind blew her hair across her face, but she didn't shiver. "You forgot your scarf?" she said, holding up nothing. Colton dropped the rag. "You came back." "I did," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I quit my job, Colton. I sold the apartment." "Why?" he asked, his voice rough. "Because I tried to find the stars in Chicago," she said, stepping closer. But I couldn't see them, and I realized, I don't want to see them if I'm not standing next to you. Colton didn't hesitate this time. He closed the distance in one stride. He wrapped his arms around her, lifting her off her feet, burying his face in her neck. "I thought I lost you," he groaned into her hair. "You're stuck with me," she laughed, tears streaming down her face. "I'm not great at fences, and I can't ride a horse, but I'm a quick learner." Colton set her down, but he didn't let go. He framed her face with his hands, looking at her with a tenderness that melted the last of the winter chill. "Welcome home, Isabella," he whispered. And then, finally, beneath the vast, open sky of Wyoming, it was a kiss that tasted of forever. The wind howled around them, but neither of them noticed. "Ti were, savin ti, were om." The mountains stood silent watch, as they always had, witnessing the moment where two worlds collided and became one.